Hello. Welcome to episode 2 of the series going over all of the presidents of the United States, from George Washington to Joe Biden and whoever follows him. God willing, someone good. And this week, we'll be discussing the second president of the United States, John Adams. Thank you for tuning in.
John Adams grew up in a farm in Massachusetts, and he wanted a simple life. His father, however, had different plans. Adams graduated Harvard at the young age of 15, and he went on to study law. One of his greatest feats before his turn as president was being charged with defending the British redcoats that were arrested for the Boston Massacre, knowing that the soldiers were in truth mostly innocent and were definitely spurred on by the angry colonists. I'm sure we can relate to angry mobs in 2022. Adams, unlike his cousin Samuel, wasn't initially radicalized by the notion of American independence, but eventually, through writing propaganda for the movement and spending time with the Sons of Liberty and other radicals, he began to adopt their pro-independence stance. He was elected to the Continental Congress in 1774 and emerged as the head of the pro-independence faction. Following the eruption of conflict after election into Concord, Adams nominated George Washington to serve as the commander of the Continental Army. Adams was essential in the war effort, not on the battlefield, but as a diplomat. He helped secure the all-important alliance with the French, and he secured an important loan from the Dutch during his visit to The Hague. Following the cessation of conflict, Adams was at the negotiation table when the Treaty of Paris was signed in 1781. He stayed in Europe and acted as a delegate to several European powers, including being the first delegate to England. Adams returned home and got even more involved with federal politics. He argued for a strong executive to counter a potentially oppressive oligarchy. I'm sure he would look at Russia today and go, what the heck, because they have a strong executive and a oppressive oligarchy, so who knows. But Adams allied himself with the likes of George Washington, Alexander Hamilton, and John Jay as a prominent Federalist. Following George Washington's famous farewell address and his exodus from D.C., Adams was elected as the second president of the United States, with his political rival Thomas Jefferson as his vice president. So, John Adams' presidency was heavily defined by his foreign policy. So at the time, the French Revolutionary Wars were rocking Europe, and American policymakers were torn between siding with the French revolutionaries or the British. The anti-Federalists wanted to ally with the French, mostly for ideological reasons, as they were engaging in a similar revolution that the United States just won, while the Federalists were making a ton of money trading with England. Adams favored the British during his administration, and the French relationship grew tenuous, with their foreign minister Talleyrand refusing to act civilly with the American diplomats. Following the attempted bribes the French wanted in turn for negotiations, the United States was in uproar, with war fever brewing. While an official declaration was never passed, in true American fashion, Adams did wage a de facto war against the French to secure American shipping, as French privateers had begun to harass American vessels. Luckily, Adams had ordered the construction of several frigates, so the Americans were well prepared for battle. After several naval victories, the war fever had calmed, and the administration sent a delegation to France for peace, much to the fury of the Hamiltonian radical end of the Federalists. The Federalist faction was badly divided as a result, and in 1800, the newly formed Republican Party was able to win the presidential election, with Thomas Jefferson as its frontrunner. Adams spent the last years of his life quietly enjoying Quincy, Massachusetts, where he and his rival, Thomas Jefferson, famously died on the same day, hours apart. So what can we learn from John Adams? The first valuable lesson we can learn from John Adams is to defend your sense of morality and truth, even when that means going against your own side ideologically. So John Adams was willing to defend the redcoats that were charged with murder at the Boston Massacre, even though he was basically going against his state, his friends, and his cousin. That shows a degree of intellectual courage that modern people somewhat lack sometimes. And I applaud John Adams for doing that. I think more public figures in this country should do that on the right and the left, and more public figures should do that across the world. We would have much less problems geopolitically if people were just willing to say what they believed instead of saying what they what they think they should say, if that makes sense. The second thing we can learn from John Adams is to, and this is a lesson that you could also take from, Odysseus, is that we play with the tools that the gods give us. Is some people are good at fighting, and some people are good at writing. Some people are good at X and Y. You can make a huge difference in the world doing what you're good at than trying to fake something. Like, take the Spartans, for example. They gave a lot of credence to the warrior type, and they wouldn't have respected the intellectual as much. But like the Athenians were very well-rounded because they respected almost all elements of a character. And I think we need to have this in our society too, where if you're competent at anything, it can change the world. And John Adams played this better than many of the founding fathers. He wasn't a military guy. He wasn't the guy who would lead soldiers into battle, and he wasn't the guy who was really good at manufacturing things, or he wasn't very entrepreneurial. But he was an academic. He was a lawyer. He was good at arguing, and he stood for his convictions. So I think we can change the world in ways we don't even realize by just doing what we're good at and allowing that to flow through us in an authentic way. I think that's something we can learn from John Adams. Anyway, well, that concludes this week's video about the president. Tune in next week for Thomas Jefferson, the big third, the first right-wing president. And have a great one. Thanks for tuning in, and leave a like and subscribe if you enjoyed. Goodbye.